She said it without blinking. "You're useless." Leave 20 years I raised her, fed her, protected her, and she dumped me on the street with nothing but 2 bags. But in those bags, I found what she feared most, the real Will. And that truth was about to burn her empire to the ground. If you're watching right now, drop a comment with where you're tuning in from. And don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss the next story. The bag hit the floor with a dull thud. Claire didn't even flinch. She just crossed her arms, eyes colder than the hallway tiles beneath my feet. I wanted to ask why. The words stopped at my lips. 20 years of shared dinners, laughter, even silence, swept aside like dust on the doorstep. She pointed at the door. No tremor in her hand, no hesitation, just dismissal, as if I had never mattered. I bent down, lifted the handle, and felt the weight of my whole life crammed into 2 bags. Her gaze followed me, steady, empty, unforgiving. I walked, but I memorized her face. Alone in the corridor, I understood. This wasn't exile. It was the opening move of her game. The picture on the wall caught my eye as I passed, the one from her graduation. Claire in a black gown, tassel crooked, teeth flashing in a smile so wide it could have split her face. I was the one behind the camera that day. I told her to hold her head high, that this moment was hers. That photo was expensive. Not the frame, not the paper, but the years it took to buy it. Nights mopping floors after long days teaching. Tips counted in dim kitchens. A dress I never bought, a vacation I never took. Traded for her tuition and her rent. I was 23 when the funeral dirt still clung to my shoes. She was 15, still asking if the monsters in the closet were real, and I swore I would never let her feel abandoned. Not once, not ever. So I became the parent neither of us asked for. Sister, guardian, watchdog. I cooked. I worked. I listened. I held her hand when she shook before exams. I stitched the hem of her prom dress by lamplight. I skipped meals so she'd never skip one. She called me her rock, her anchor. She said she owed me everything, and I believed her. The night she opened that acceptance letter, she screamed, spun, kissed my cheek. She danced around the kitchen, her voice cracking with joy. I clapped and laughed, but my mind was racing. How many shifts? How many loans? Where would the money come from this time? She never asked. She never saw. She just stepped into her future, sure the ground beneath her would hold. I was the ground. I laid every brick, every dollar, every sacrifice, and I told myself, family is worth it. Now, standing in her hallway, bags in my hand, watching her eyes harden like stone, I looked at that photo again. Claire, smiling, young, proud. I paid. She smiled. She forgot. And forgetting, I realized, was its own kind of betrayal. The mattress groaned when I sat down, springs pushing through thin fabric like bones. The room smelled of bleach and mildew, the kind of place people pay by the week, not by the month. The window rattled in its frame. Rust crept up the edges. Outside, a neon sign blinked red, then died, then came alive again. It cast a pulse across the cracked wallpaper, like the room was breathing with me. I set the bags down, 2 of them. That was all. 43 years of living, reduced to polyester zippers and worn handles. I unrolled a sweater, folded tight from habit, and pressed my face into it. It didn't smell like home anymore. The heater clanked, cough, fell silent. I pulled the thin blanket across my lap and stared at the water stains above the bed. Shapes formed, shapes dissolved. My mind wandered back to dinners I'd cooked, birthdays I'd hosted, the nights I stayed up late waiting for Claire to come home safe. I held the keys in my palm, cold metal biting my skin. My thumb traced the grooves over and over. I couldn't let go. I whispered to the empty room, "This isn't where I belong." But no one answered. Only the buzz of the broken light in the hall, the echo of a cough from next door, the steady drip of a leaking faucet. I opened the drawer beside the bed, hoping for a Gideon Bible, or maybe just emptiness. The handle stuck. I tugged harder. The wood creaked, splintered, then gave. A stack of papers slid forward, yellowed edges curling with time. They shouldn't have been there. They didn't belong to this place, this night, this version of my life. But there they were. Letters, envelopes, something with my father's handwriting across the top. My chest tightened. My hand froze mid-air. The drawer jammed. A file slipped. It landed at my feet, waiting. I stared down at it, heart pounding, knowing in my gut that whatever was inside would cut the darkness open. And once it was open, nothing would ever be the same again. The envelope was heavier than it looked. Thick paper, edges yellowed, my father's handwriting steady across the front. I hadn't seen it in years, yet I knew it instantly. My fingers trembled as I slid the file open. The rustle of paper was sharp in the silence, like the room itself was listening. The first page carried his name, bold, formal. Below it, lines of careful sentences, notarized and sealed. I traced the ink with my fingertip, the same way I used to trace the veins on his weathered hand when I was a child, and then I saw it, clear as the day it was written. The apartment, the savings, all of it left to me, not split, not shared. Mine. I sat still, too still. The motel clock ticked loud enough to bruise my ears. Claire had told me everything was ours. She said the papers were gone, that Dad left her in charge because I was too soft, too naive with money. And I believed her, because I wanted to believe my sister would never lie about blood, about home. But here it was, in black ink and legal seals, proof that she had lied, proof that she had hidden the truth, proof that betrayal had been carved into her smile long before she told me to leave. I closed my eyes and breathed, in, out, in again. My chest burned. Anger coiled tight, but beneath it, something else flickered. Hope, a way out. I read every word slowly, carefully, twice. The language was exact. No room for doubt. No room for her. I folded the paper, pressed it flat with both palms, then slipped it back inside the envelope. My lips didn't move, but the thought pounded in my head. She stole what was never hers. She built her world on sand, and I've just found the tide. I stared at the signature at the bottom, sharp, unmistakable. My father's hand, firm even in his last days. For the first time in weeks, I sat upright, shoulders back, breath steady. Claire had buried the truth. Now it lived in my hands. She hid it. I hid it back. And when the moment came, she would never see it coming. The phone buzzed against the motel nightstand. A single notification lit the cracked screen. Transaction blocked. The words glowed like a secret signal, small but sharp. I had been to Fitzgerald's office that morning, the lawyer who had known my father for decades. His hands shook when he saw the papers I carried, then steadied once he realized what they meant. He didn't waste words. He picked up the phone, called the bank, and within an hour, everything Claire thought she controlled was under lock. I walked back to the motel, slow, steady. My face gave nothing away. Inside, though, I carried a fire I hadn't felt in years. Claire didn't know yet. She was still spending. I could imagine it. Her nails tapping the counter as she handed Kevin another card, another demand, a dress, a dinner, a new lease on furniture that was never hers. She smiled. She posed. She flaunted. And I waited. I held my silence like a blade. No calls, no warnings, no scenes. Only stillness. At night, I pictured her checking her accounts, her lips curling with confidence, and then denied. It was almost poetic. The same woman who told me I was useless, who watched me walk out with 2 bags now holding a useless card of her own. I didn't rush the moment. I didn't tell a soul. I just collected the slips of evidence Fitzgerald sent me, screenshots, frozen accounts, the slow unraveling of her safety net. 3 nights later, another buzz, another decline, another freeze. She laughed at brunch. She ordered champagne. She thought she was untouchable, but I knew better. I folded the envelope, tucked it under my coat, and waited for her to walk herself deeper into the trap she had built. She laughed. I waited. She spent nothing. And soon she would discover how expensive silence could be. The folder hit the table with a crack. Paper slapped wood. The sound cut through the room like a gavel striking. Claire blinked. Once. Twice. Her lips curled into a smirk that didn't reach her eyes. "What's this supposed to be?" she asked, her voice dripping casual. I didn't answer. I opened the file, slid the document across the polished surface. My father's signature glared up under the light, bold and undeniable. Her fingers hovered over the page but didn't land. She leaned back instead, scoffing, reaching for her glass of wine. "You're desperate," she said. "You'd forge anything if it meant clinging to that apartment." I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I just held her gaze and let the silence thicken. Then the knock came. Hard. 2 beats, then the door swung wide. The badge flashed under the ceiling lamp. Gold, sharp, official. Claire's smirk faltered. Her hand dropped from the stem of the glass. The officer stepped in, another behind him. Their eyes moved from her to the file, then back again. I spoke finally. "Read it." Out loud, her throat worked. She didn't. The officer did. Each line sliced her story apart, every clause of the will a blade. The room shifted. Her laughter cracked. Kevin shifted in his chair, suddenly small. Claire tried to stand, but the officer's hand pressed her shoulder down. She froze. I leaned forward, my voice low, steady. "This isn't exile. This is justice." Her eyes darted, looking for an exit that didn't exist. She froze. The badge flashed, and for the first time in years, I watched my sister fall silent. The sunlight slipped through the fresh coat of paint on the window frame. A clean line, gold and warm, cutting across the studio floor. I stood in the center of the room, my room. No longer borrowed, no longer shared, no longer stolen. The walls smelled of plaster and possibility. The air carried no trace of her perfume, no echo of her laughter, just silence, soft and mine. I laid out the brushes, one by one, wood worn smooth, bristles splayed from years of waiting. They hadn't touched canvas since I was 22, when responsibility replaced dreams. Now, at 65, they sat ready, waiting for my hand. I dipped one into paint, a bright stroke of cobalt, and pressed it against the white. The bristles bent. The color spread. It felt like breath returning to lungs. Behind me, on the corner table, a small stack of sketch pads waited for Saturday. The neighborhood kids would come then, children who carried stories heavier than backpacks, children who needed a place where their hands could make color instead of fists. I touched the paper, imagined their faces, knew already that their joy would echo louder than any courtroom victory. Revenge had been tempting, justice had been necessary, but this was something else. I took the keys from my pocket, cold, heavy. I placed them on the windowsill where the light struck them bright. Once they had been weapons in a war with my sister. Now they were anchors to a home I had reclaimed, not just in law, but in spirit. I stepped back, looked at the room, looked at myself in the reflection of the glass. Older, steadier whole. The sun moved higher, spilling light across the canvas, across my hands, across the silence I had earned. And for the first time in decades, I wasn't surviving. I was living. The keys are still on my windowsill, cold metal glowing in the late afternoon light. I sometimes pick them up, turn them in my hand, feel their weight. They no longer mean doors or locks. They mean continuity. They mean choice. Outside, the children's voices rise, brushes clatter in jars, colors spill across cheap paper like tiny rebellions. One girl paints a tree with no roots. Another boy draws a house with only one open window. They laugh while painting absence. I smile, because absence can also be a kind of beginning. The past sits quietly in the corners of my home. Old chairs, framed photos, the smell of varnish. Nothing erases what was done, but nothing prevents what I will create. I dip a brush. The paint spreads wide, blue into white, motion into stillness. Revenge is loud, but healing is quieter, heavier, harder to ignore. The keys remain on the sill, waiting. Not for her return, but for whatever door I decide to open next. Sometimes the hardest victories are not won in battle. They are won in silence, when you finally realize you are free. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If you haven't already, subscribe for more. And if you've lived through something similar, share your story in the comments. I'd love to read it.